The fastest way to make an avoidant lose control is simple. Stop chasing. No extra texts, no begging, no emotional rescue, no long message trying to explain your pain, just silence. And for someone who built their entire sense of control on being chased, that silence can feel like the ground disappearing beneath them. Because the avoidant does not always leave because they do not care. Sometimes they leave because distance is the only place where they feel safe. But here's the part most people miss. Their distance only works when someone else panics. Their silence only feels powerful when someone keeps trying to break it. Their emotional withdrawal only protects them when the other person keeps reaching back. So what happens when nobody reaches? What happens when the person they expected to chase them simply stops? That is where the entire dynamic changes. And that is where the avoidant begins to face the one thing they have been running from the whole time: themselves. But that is not where the pattern really begins. To understand why an avoidant comes back when you stop chasing, we have to look at what emotional distance actually does for them. Most people see an avoidant person and think they are strong, cold, independent, unbothered, difficult to reach. They seem like the one with all the power. They can stop replying. They can pull away. They can act like closeness is too much. They can make someone else feel needy simply for wanting clarity. And from the outside, that can look like confidence. But in dark psychology, emotional distance is not always strength. Sometimes it is protection, sometimes it is control, and sometimes it is fear wearing the mask of independence. An avoidant person often learns early that needing someone is dangerous. Maybe their feelings were ignored. Maybe closeness felt unsafe. Maybe asking for comfort led to rejection. Maybe love came with pressure, criticism, or inconsistency, so they learned a rule: do not need too much. Do not depend too much. Do not let anyone get close enough to disappoint you. Over time, that rule becomes a personality. They become the person who seems calm when others are emotional. The person who pulls away when things get serious. The person who says they need space, but never explains what space means. The person who creates distance, then feels safer when someone else becomes anxious. That is the hidden loop. The avoidant pulls away. The other person panics. The other person texts more. The other person asks what happened. The other person tries to fix it. And the avoidant feels two things at once: safe, because they have created distance, and wanted, because someone is still chasing. That combination can become addictive. They get the comfort of connection without the risk of full vulnerability. They get proof that they matter without having to fully show up. They get control without having to admit they are afraid. This is why chasing an avoidant often makes the pattern worse. The more you chase, the more powerful the distance becomes. The more you explain, the less they have to. The more you try to repair everything alone, the more they learn that disappearing does not end the connection. It only makes you work harder. That is not healthy love. That is a behavioral loop. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The turning point comes when the chaser stops playing their part. No dramatic goodbye, no angry paragraph, no final attempt to make them understand. Just a quiet shift. The messages stop, the checking stops, the emotional rescue stops. The person who used to ask, "Are we okay?" finally stops asking, and that silence hits differently, because now the avoidant is alone with the distance they created. At first, they may feel relief. Finally, no pressure. Finally, no demands. Finally, space. But slowly, something begins to change. The space no longer feels peaceful. It feels empty. The silence no longer feels powerful. It feels unanswered. The distance no longer confirms control. It begins to raise a question. Why are they not chasing me? That question is important because for the avoidant, being chased was part of the system. It reassured them that the connection was still there. It proved they had not fully lost the person. It allowed them to stay emotionally unavailable while still feeling emotionally important. But when the other person stops chasing, that reassurance disappears. Now the avoidant has to sit with their own decision. They wanted distance. Now they have it. They wanted silence. Now nobody is filling it. They wanted space. Now the space is real. And that is when the emotional power begins to shift. The avoidant starts checking. Not always obviously. Sometimes they check your profile, sometimes they reread old messages. Sometimes they look at the last thing you sent and wonder why you did not send more. Sometimes they wait for the notification they were certain would come. But it does not. And this creates confusion. Because the usual pattern has been interrupted, they cannot blame you for being too emotional. You are not reacting. They cannot call you needy. You are not chasing. They cannot say you are pressuring them. You have stepped back. Now the only thing left in the room is their own withdrawal. And that is uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Because avoidants are often prepared for emotional intensity from other people. They are not prepared for calm self-respect. They know how to handle begging. They know how to handle conflict. They know how to handle someone asking for closure. But they often do not know how to handle someone who simply stops participating in the cycle. That is why the person who does not chase becomes so difficult to forget. Not because they are playing a game, not because they are manipulating, but because they are no longer feeding the avoidance defense system. They are no longer giving the avoidant anxiety to react against. They are no longer making themselves the problem. And without that, the avoidant has to face the truth. The connection did not become unsafe because the other person cared. It became unsafe because closeness triggered something inside them. That realization can be painful because it exposes the difference between wanting love and being able to receive it. Many avoidants do want connection. They want to be understood. They want to feel safe. They want someone who does not abandon them. But the moment real intimacy appears, their system reads it as danger. A simple conversation feels like pressure. A need for clarity feels like control. A request for consistency feels like being trapped. So they retreat. And when they retreat, they often tell themselves a story. I am just busy. I need freedom. They are too much. This is too intense. I am better alone. Sometimes those words are true, but sometimes they are just a shield. A way to avoid admitting, I am scared of being needed. I am scared of being seen. I am scared that if I let someone close, I will lose control. That is why emotional stability can be so disarming to an avoidant. A calm person does not chase. They do not beg. They do not collapse when distance appears. They do not make the avoidant responsible for their entire nervous system. They simply observe the behavior. They notice the pattern. They ask for respect. And if respect does not come, they step back. That kind of person is dangerous to the avoidant's old strategy. Not because they attack, because they refuse to become the anxious mirror the avoidant expects. They do not say, please come back. They say, take the space you asked for, and then they actually let them have it. This creates a kind of emotional mirror the avoidant is not used to. For once, there is no chaos to blame, no dramatic reaction, no desperate message, no proof that the other person is unstable, just silence. And in that silence, the avoidant begins to see themselves more clearly. They see how often they pull away. They see how quickly they label care as pressure. They see how much power they got from being chased. They see how uncomfortable they become when someone no longer fights for access to them. This does not always make them change. That part matters. Not every avoidant comes back. Not every avoidant becomes self-aware. Not every avoidant is secretly waiting to heal. Some people simply leave. Some people repeat the pattern with someone else. Some people prefer the safety of distance more than the risk of intimacy. But when an avoidant does come back after you stop chasing, it often happens because the old system failed. They expected pursuit. They got peace. They expected anxiety. They got silence. They expected you to keep the connection alive alone. But you stopped. And now they have to decide whether they actually want the person or only wanted the control of being chased. That distinction is everything. Because real love cannot be built on one person withdrawing and the other person bleeding emotionally to keep the bond alive. Real love requires two people, two nervous systems, two sets of needs, two people willing to communicate without turning distance into punishment. A healthy person can need space and still be kind. They can feel overwhelmed and still be honest. They can ask for time without disappearing. They can say, I care about you, but I need a moment. Avoidance becomes harmful when space is used without responsibility, when silence becomes control, when withdrawal becomes a test, when the other person is left confused, anxious, and constantly trying to earn basic clarity. That is where many people lose themselves. They start believing that if they just say the right thing, the avoidant will finally feel safe. If they are calmer, if they are more patient, if they ask for less, if they need less, if they become easier to love. But that is the trap. You cannot heal someone's avoidance by abandoning yourself. You cannot make someone emotionally available by proving you can survive without needs. You cannot build safety by accepting confusion. And you cannot love someone into accountability if they benefit from avoiding it. The moment you stop chasing is not about punishing them. It is about returning to yourself. It is saying, I will not keep reaching for someone who keeps moving the door. I will not confuse distance with depth. I will not call inconsistency a mystery. I will not make myself smaller so someone else can feel safe. And when you do that, something important happens. You become harder to control. Because the anxious-avoidant trap only works when one person keeps chasing the emotional answer the other person refuses to give. When the chase stops, the loop breaks. The avoidant loses the emotional proof that they are still being pursued. And the chaser gets back the energy they were spending on someone else's fear. That is why stopping the chase feels so powerful. Not because it guarantees they return, but because it reveals the truth. If someone only values you when you stop being available, they may not be responding to love. They may be responding to loss of control. If someone only reaches out when you stop chasing, they may not be ready for intimacy. They may simply be uncomfortable with being ignored. And if someone comes back without accountability, the pattern will repeat. They may miss you. They may want access again. They may even sound sincere. But sincerity without change is only another cycle. So if an avoidant comes back, listen carefully. Not to the emotion, to the accountability. Do they explain what happened? Do they name the pattern? Do they respect the impact their distance had on you? Do they communicate differently? Do they show consistency after returning? Or do they simply want the comfort of knowing you are still there? That is the difference between reconnection and repetition. This is where many people make the mistake. They think the avoidant coming back means they finally won. But someone returning is not the same as someone changing. A message is not repair. A confession is not consistency. Missing you is not emotional maturity. And regret is not the same as responsibility. The real question is not, did they come back? The real question is, can they stay present without making you pay for their fear? Because the goal is not to make an avoidant chase you. The goal is to stop losing yourself in someone else's emotional distance. That is the lesson inside this pattern. If you are dealing with an avoidant person, do not confuse patience with self-abandonment. Do not confuse understanding with waiting forever. Do not confuse their fear of closeness with proof that you need to try harder. You can understand their wounds and still protect your peace. You can care about them and still stop chasing. You can recognize the pattern and still choose yourself. Because the person who finally stops chasing does not become cold. They become clear. And clarity is the one thing the avoidant dynamic cannot survive. Not because clarity attacks anyone, but because clarity stops feeding the cycle. No more panic, no more begging, no more proving your worth to someone who keeps stepping back. Just one quiet decision. If they need space, let them have it. If they want distance, stop filling it. If they choose silence, stop translating it into hope. And if they come back, do not ask only whether they missed you. Ask whether they are finally ready to meet you without running. That is when the truth appears. Because the fastest way to see what someone really wants is to stop chasing them and watch what they do with the silence.